Camera, look at the camera.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for another episode of Hard Corner with your hosts, Dale and Eric. And in this episode, we're continuing the discussion about Uvalde. Gentlemen, for you.
So, guys, we're back on part two here for Uvalde. We know this incident happened years ago, and there's been a number of incidents that's happened since. However, the significance that this incident had on the nation and on law enforcement response in general is pretty profound. So in the last video, we talked about the lack of pressure or the lack of pressing in on the threat when we know that there's intent, there's motive, and there's a means and a method to inflict harm on children. So we know that the officers there, again, are good people. We're trying to do the right thing, but made some big mistakes. One of the mistakes that we ended on was the chief actually negotiating with the shooter. When you get into hostage negotiation or you get into any kind of tactical negotiations, you want to have a degree of separation between your command staff and the threat that you're negotiating with for a number of reasons. And I don't want to give away any secret sauce, but common sense would dictate that you want to be able to have a little bit of time to delegate and to make decisions. So moving into the video itself, we're going to break down some more information and try to give you a better understanding of what happened and hopefully how to improve that both on the law enforcement side and on the civilian side.
No response is ever heard.
I need cover.
Nearby, other officers trying to clear classrooms, terrified students and teachers. At 12:08 p.m., the gunman's own hands.
I'm going to stop there for a second. If you guys saw, again, I'm not trying to nitpick, but I just want to make sure I'm pointing out what I see. You had kids or teachers being evacuated out of a door and an officer with a long gun standing in the hallway. You'll notice that he moved to cover and he got into a position of cover for himself, where technically we want the officer to stand out and actually plate those people being evacuated so that they can take the rounds so that no innocent person gets shot in any kind of crossfire or any kind of blind firing.
And like we discussed on the episode one of this situation, any situation like this, we respond, especially to a school. The priorities of life are so important, and that officer's got to put his life less important than those kids and those victims. And by doing what Eric just described, he put his life above theirs because he was trying to stay safe while they were, moving to evacuate him.
And man, we didn't see what he saw. We're just giving you the perspective that we're seeing, on the screen.
Again, we've done this before, and we'll do it again. We weren't there. We don't have all the information. We've read a pretty big report on it. It's 800 pages or so.
At least,
it's huge. So, we don't have all the answers. We're just going off basic tactics that we learned and things that we would employ when we would respond to situations like this, because he and I have responded to school shootings. It's happened multiple times between us. So we have experience in doing that.
I'm going to ask a hard question. So this video appears to have lots of officers putting themselves in cover. We saw earlier, previous episode, officer laying on the ground rather than running towards the threat. And then in this example, we see the officer taking cover. And then we see that a lot of the officers that were on this response doing that. What would have caused what seems to be a complete opposite of what you described? Most officers are trained to take their life less or after a potential victim. What would cause so many officers to do the opposite of what you say is natural for this role, to being a police officer?
I mean, it's a natural human,
self-preservation.
Self-preservation to do that.
I know we talked in some of our other episodes, we mainly train civilians, but we do train law enforcement, and you would be shocked, literally shocked. And when we, inoculate them with stimulus and blank gunfire, how many of them revert back to self-preservation? The other thing too, you have to consider too, is like Eric mentioned in a previous episode, there's no standard of training. Have these guys ever been trained in something like this? Do they know what the best practice is? So I'm not sure how big their department is. I'll say this too, and you can agree or disagree. It takes a special kind of person to be able to say, you know what, if I get killed today, it's for the better good. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that, so it could be that officer's first day or last day on the job. Like You don't know what's going on. So it's like to have that expectation, that's like the standard what it should be, especially for tactical teams. But for local police departments, I don't know if they ever trained on it. We don't know.
Man, most of the time you'll find in law enforcement training that number one, there's a lack of training. There's a lack of resources, a lack of time management, a lack of commitment to the training across the board. Most of your really dedicated, hardcore officers are going to be found on your tactical teams that have the time, the equipment, and sometimes the budgets to commit to this. But what a lot of training lacks when it comes to these kind of incidents is mindset. So you can do all the physical stuff, the shooting, the breaching, the clearing, all the tactical CQB you want. But if you don't get your mindset training and you start having some conversations with yourself and expectations, you're never going to accomplish the goal.
And I'll add this too, when it comes to training, a lot of departments don't use force on force and don't use blank gunfire, right? They're shooting on paper targets. So unless you're inoculated with that stress to understand what gunshots sound like inside a building, that's how you build up those training reps and that confidence in yourself to say, yeah, I'm going through this door. Yes, I may get shot, but I'm confident enough in my tactics to where I can return gunfire and take out the individual doing this. So like it's also in how you train and how intently you train. So that's another big piece to it too.
One of the things we used to do in our training is if we did force on force with simunitions or any kind of marking rounds, number one, it's painful. So it lets you know that, what you're doing is not working. But we always had a philosophy of if I, the officer, get shot in training, I don't go down. I don't care where I'm shot for whatever reason. I continue to press. I continue to fight. Now, our role players, if they get shot in training, then obviously we want them to go down in a reasonable manner. But the officer never, ever puts themselves in that mindset of I'm shot, I'm out of the fight. You're going to fight until you basically don't have a central nervous system to tell yourself otherwise.
And then real quick, to add to the training part, we're going to talk a lot about training over the course of this podcast with specific episodes dedicated to training. But there's something called training scars where you train a certain way. That's how you're going to respond in the real world. So when we do active shooter or active aggressor training for these departments, remember the duck walk?
Yeah.
How many times they hear gunfire, especially if you're training a department that's got some retired officers that go back to work, they want to get super small and actually duck walk when they hear gunshots. Well, how effectively can they maneuver and go through, doorways and things like that and mitigate threats if you're duck walking? You can't. So there's a whole lot that goes into this, but if you want to just key up that video so we don't get too bogged down on the training side, because we'll have a lot more information about that in upcoming episodes.
The gunman's own aunt heard begging authorities to shoot him.
Get him! Get him! Help us! Help us! He's doing it because his mom and
Nearly an hour after that first gunshot, authorities shout questions back and forth, looking for keys. They'd later find the door unlocked. Painful minutes follow until 12:50 p.m. when a team of officers reach the classroom. With the gunman dead, authorities frantically call for medical backup.
Okay, yeah,
Let's stop here, Brent.
As I know where Dale's going to take this, but just to get back up just a little bit for understanding police procedure. Number one, if there's only a single breach point, you're already at kind of like you're almost at a loss, right? So your primary breach point is going to be the door. They're asking for a key, but you need to have some manual or mechanical or even some explosive breaching. Explosive breaching isn't, used by everyone on every agency, but having those tools and resources at hand ready to go, the training that's involved with that, but also having multiple breach points. On a situation like this, obviously, primary fields of fire and things like that are to be a consideration, but we want to be able to breach windows. We want to be able to breach walls. We want to be able to breach doors. And some of that time might be simultaneous to be used as a distraction, but also to be used as an alternate breach as well.
Yeah, 100% agree with what Eric said. Schools have sometimes something called Knox boxes. They're for fire department only. They have keys, but police aren't granted access to it. At least that's how it's been in our experiences. Yeah. To Eric's point, they actually have people holding outside. And, obviously that's a very vulnerable spot. But to his point about distractions, At that point, it's all or nothing. If you got to throw a couple flashbangs in, like you have to do whatever you got to do because it's the dilemmas, distractions, and diversions.
Yeah, you're technically by procedure, you don't.
Breaks.
Yeah, you don't want to use flashbangs on kids if you don't have to. But in a hostage rescue situation, you're going to go ahead and make that decision that it's a necessary risk.
And then also too, when we talk about school shootings, when we talk about things like this to our clients, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And I also believe too that 76-minute gap where they did not enter, it wasn't until BORTAC came and actually entered the room. Is that your understanding?
My understanding, yeah.
So a federal agency came onto a state level and decided to make entry. And the other thing I'll point out too is sometimes the more police officers you have somewhere, the worse it is because it's analysis through paralysis. Somebody's a boss, the chief's there. All those people in that hallway could have executed a plan much, much earlier, but they start talking back and forth. Unless someone's willing to take charge and actually say, no, this is what we're doing. You're on me. We're doing this.
Yeah.
A lot of times it like the wheels of the police department like bog down.
Yeah. So we used to have this thing, time is on your side. It used to be told to us quite a bit in these situations, time's on your side. And you could say it is in some situations, but we used to have a saying that kind of took that a little further. And we would say, well, there's a difference between good time and bad time. So if you're using your time properly, so if you've got downtime and you're negotiating, then while you're negotiating, you should be prepping for the next step. You should have plan A, plan B, plan C ready to go, equipment in place, personnel in place, briefings in place, so that when that good time ends and the bad time starts necessarily, you can transition really quick and don't have to like go back and lose precious time.
Well, and we've done this before, like rehearsals. So say we have a barricaded subject that's not an active aggressor in an apartment building. We with the manager show us a floor plan that's exactly the same, so we can take dudes over there to go ahead and figure out the plan as best you can, because no plan ever goes to 100% the way you plan it. That's just not how things work.
Mike Tyson always had a saying, said everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
But the last thing I'll say before we move on is like, this is an active aggressor with kids. Like, you have to go. There's zero reason not. Like you can't.
I don't. I mean, it's if there's a reason not to go, you're gonna have to give me a very good reason.
And then for the aunt to say go ahead and kill him, we had a situation here where we're at, where we'll talk about at a later date. Old National Bank, the mom said the same thing. So like, these situations are very nuanced. There's a lot of issues on how that person got there to be to the point where they can kill children, which is a spot that I don't know how anybody can get to. But we're going to talk about some of that stuff later too when we talk about our training. But man, it's just it's very, very, very unfortunate. But I do think too, a lot of people learned a lot after this. So there's no silver lining when children's lives are lost. But this really, not since Columbine had an event, I think had this much impact on police culture and police training.
I agree with that.
Can the police departments be held liable in a situation like this?
Historically, they haven't been. For it's very tough to go after a police department, but I'd say here in the last couple of years, there's been a big change in that. There's been a national trend where they are holding officers liable. They're starting to prosecute officers for lack of action. I know my dad came on the department back in the 70s, and he said that back then they would do something for basically if you were a coward, lack of courage. I don't really think they do that anymore, but they do more for just, I don't know if it's incompetence or negligence.
And I'll add this too, though. So there's a term we'll talk about. This is more legalese, qualified immunity. A lot of states are trying to get that away from police to where if you're acting in good faith, you cannot be charged with the crime. Situations such as this, there was another shooting in a Florida school, Winter Park, Florida. SRO been there 30 years. He actually was charged with the crime. And if you recall, in his 30-year career, he only had 8 hours of training in active aggressor response. So is it their fault? Yes. But is it their fault? Is it the department's fault as well? 100%.
Yeah. I go back to, I'm not going to, can an officer make mistakes and officer do things wrong? Absolutely. Right. But a lot of this time, people want to go after the officer in particular, and they lose sight of the department that's supposed to be supporting them or giving them the tools and the equipment. And a lot of times that doesn't happen.
Yeah, like chiefs of police historically aren't held responsible. Like, I don't know what ended up happening with that chief specifically, but he's the reason for the inaction. So, I mean, you know, responsibilities, it's a fine line because you're talking about, you know, different things, and it's not a black and white issue. It is to us, but in the eyes of the law, it's really hard to parse through, you know, is this person liable because they didn't act, right? Yeah. Because on the other end of the table, if you have somebody go in and they shoot a kid, guess what? Accidentally, because they're not prepared or trained.
So kind of going into that, go back to the video, I heard a lot of shots being fired. We don't do round counts like when you're, you know, how many rounds it takes to shoot somebody. It all depends. You know, you shoot till the threat stops. But I can tell you, in a room full of kids on a hostage rescue situation, you better be dialed in and you better be shooting one round at a time, or what we call controlled pairs. A lot of people say double tap. That's a whole nother thing. But even your shooting has to be so dialed in, because like Dale said, if you do miss in a room like that, you know, you're going to be liable for that as well. But not only being liable, but just living with that.
Yeah, feel that. And then last thing I'll mention, we probably need to get away from this one and get on to something else. But like Eric said, the amount of rounds we heard, I guarantee there's some sympathetic reflexes in there.
Yeah.
So meaning one person shoots and somebody else says, "Oh shit, he shot. I got to shoot now." Like that happens a lot. You'll see it in training, and it happens a lot in actual police shootings, and we'll talk about that too later. So,
I just want to point out something from earlier. You mentioned we were talking about Florida, the SRO that had 30 years of experience that ended up getting charged. SRO, School Resource Officer. Just
correct.
For folks who want to know. All right, guys, what are we doing? More Uvalde video? What do you think?
Yeah, let's see what you got. Does it wrap up, or anything else left on that?
A frightening scene unfolding into one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history. And tonight, NBC News has reached.
So just kind of seeing what I saw there. Like, number one thing I would cover on that is the post incident. So now you got to do evacuations. You're going to set up cordons and get people out in a, you know, hasty manner. But, you know, that's kind of some post incident kind of stuff.
And then we can cover what we do with schools now when we train them is like the incidents, one phase of it. The secondary part is the post incident. You're talking about reunification areas. You're going to have parents showing up. It's utter chaos. So school systems and schools in general have to prepare for not only the incident, but what do we have to prepare for the aftermath? Because the aftermath, sometimes communications, a lot of times you have multiple people talking and it gives mixed messages. So there's so much more things to consider after the incident, which we'll cover on a later podcast. Brent?
Yeah, here's some follow-up here. 2 Uvalde school police officers charged in mass shooting.
Wow.
This is a story from a year ago, but it looks like, yeah, these officers were charged. You know,
yeah, I mean, I hate to see that, man. But, you know, like I said, officers can make mistakes, and whether they're incompetent or negligent, those are 2 separate issues. But a lot of time, the responsibility falls on the individual officer and not the department.
Shield.
Yeah, Dale just pointed out, you saw that shield. A lot of times those shields are used for they're bulletproof. You know, some are rifle rated, some are pistol rated, but if I ever used a shield, it was always for the protection of myself or my team. When we got into hostage rescue type incidents, we would always ditch that shield. Some people get married to it. They got to use it for everything. It's like any tool, right? You got to have it in your toolbox, and sometimes you use it and sometimes you don't.
Yeah, when you go into an active aggressor, you got your plates, and we'll talk about some of the situations we've been involved in before, and Eric will tell you a specific one that we were involved in, but you'll throw your plates on, grab mags, grab your rifle. You may or may not grab your helmet. You'll probably grab a medical bag. Then you're going to go, because you can't take that extra time to put all this extra gear on. Time is not allowed for it.
I hope the audience does as well. We really appreciate everybody that's taken the time to watch these videos as they have so far. We'll be coming back with more episodes very soon, so stay tuned. Hard Corner.